You're here for Season 7 of the Whole Horse Podcast, now at 110 episodes and counting. I'm your host, Alexa Linton, coming to you from Vancouver Island in Canada. I can't wait to continue to share thought-provoking, edge-pushing, geeky, and often challenging conversations with horse professionals from all areas of our industry who are working to make horses' lives better. This season, you can look forward to deep dives into equine bodywork and cranial work with my friend and colleague, Elise Miki, and much more on the specifics of creating enriching, healthy horse spaces, an area I'm particularly passionate about. I'm so excited that you're here listening in, meeting great horsey humans, and hopefully learning a new thing or two about horses and yourself. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back. You're here for the Whole Horse Podcast. And once again, I have a guest that I'm excited to talk to. I hope you're excited to hear from. We have Kendra Skorstad here today on the podcast. Welcome, Kendra.
Hi, thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. So Kendra reached out to me and she was like, can we have another podcast on hoof stuff? And I was like, yes, please. We need more podcasts on hoofs. This is an area that's just, I think, so critical for our understanding as owners, as body workers, as, people supporting horses in our world. So really stoked to get more deeply into this conversation with you today, Kendra, and unpack this a little further as we go along. So I wanted to start by asking, just for you, what has kind of got you to this point in your journey with horses? Like, from what I know about you, you're passionate about hooves and about horse bodies, body work, these sorts of things. So how did you arrive at this point on your journey?
I started my career a little bit like a lot of people do. I went to farrier school and I learned a lot about the hoof and I learned a lot about the distal limb anatomy. And that was kind of it. And so for a while, I just looked at feet. And then one day I got frustrated because somebody brought a horse to me and they said, hey, would you have a look at the feet? And I said, well, which horse is this? They're like, oh, you do this one. I'm like, I didn't even recognize the horse. I had to look at the feet in order to know who the horse was. And it bugged me. It really bugged me. I was like, okay, so there's more to the horse than the foot. Super. Got that. And then I started to realize that there was more to it. And of course, as a lifelong horse lover, I knew that there was more to it, but we kind of get tunnel vision when we're learning something. And I super focused on the feet and kind of forgot to look at the rest of it. And the rest of it was really important. So after a few years of working solely on feet, I stepped back. I went down the barefoot route. I completely stopped shoeing. I sold all of my tools. Went down that rabbit hole, like that barefoot was best and that only barefoot was the answer. Oh, and there's more to it. And I learned about body work and massage and acupressure. And man, I really started to put pieces together with that. And then at one point I started to realize that I couldn't help all the horses that were barefoot. And then that started to bother me. And so then I started playing with composite shoes and boots and casting, got very proficient with all of that. And then that wasn't enough. And I was like, well, gosh darn. Okay, here we are, full circle, coming back and going, all right, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to do it better. And I'm not going to be as bad as I was. Super cool. I learned from some of the best in the industry, people that aren't names that get thrown around, but are out there doing incredible work. And I learned an amazing amount about the feet and then the body. And then not too terribly long ago, I actually had a pretty bad riding accident and left me with a brain injury. And I have worked to rehab my body, and in that journey, rehabbing with my horse and her learning how to use her body. And it totally elevated my relationship with my horse, my understanding about horses in general. I've been a rider my whole life, but this was totally new and totally different and really exciting. And when I would see her with a trainer and see some of the changes that I was seeing in her feet, and she had really good feet, but seeing the positive changes with the posture changes, with the better muscling, and appropriate muscling, and how she was using her body, it was mind blowing. And then it wasn't long after that I found Celeste's work and tried to eat up as much of that as I could. And then I was really starting to see the connections between the feet and the body. And that was really exciting. So, I'd started to see the things that are buzzwords now, the negative palmar angle, the broken back hoof pastern axis. And those were things that I had been seeing for quite some time and had tools and was working towards. And like all of us, we just get better the longer we keep practicing. And I've continued to have really good success, rehabbing a lot of horses and horses that have to stay performing. They can't, they don't always have the option to have time off and downtime. And so that poses a different set of challenges to play with and explore. Like, how do we do this and keep them going? Is it possible? And it is. It really is. So it's been super fun to be able to take what I know and I see, and then to see some of the new science that's coming out and the research that's coming out about the feet, and that it's more accessible. I think social media has done a really great job, and there's been a few key players that have been able to translate all of the research papers, right, and make that accessible and understandable, for the rest of us that aren't research scientists. It's been really enlightening and very confirming in several ways for me, that this is what I was seeing. And it's like, oh, science says that too. And it's like, oh, yes, cool. So that's really been exciting for me. And then again, to see the connection with the bodywork and really understand the impacts of hoof morphology on the body and how the body impacts hoof morphology. It has become a rabbit hole that is never ending and really exciting. And then more than that, because I'm not a very big human being, I don't always have the physical strength to hang on to horses. And because of that, I've actually, instead of feeling bad about that, have found that to be quite the gift, because it allowed me to play with why horses would struggle to stand, what was happening in their bodies. They weren't just being disrespectful or naughty or just trying to mess with me. They were actually just trying to talk to me about how their bodies felt or where they were at emotionally. And that has been I would say career changing for me, because I feel like I understand more about where they're at and what they experience when they have to shift their weight and pick up a leg and hold it for a prolonged period of time with a body that's in a compensation pattern and they're having a pain response, or they're not emotionally prepared to be doing what we're doing. And so it's been really a fascinating journey in the last, I'd probably say 6 years.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I have like a million questions that I want to ask you. I'm like, okay, Alexa, stay focused. Oh man, that is so great. It was like, just like literally 100 tangents that we could go down here. I mean, I have so much curiosity about this piece around hooves and posture, hooves and body work. I also, from a very personal sort of selfish place, would love to hear more about what happens for a horse when they're having to hold a leg up in a trim. And I think this is something that a lot of people deal with, is that, horses that are, quote unquote misbehaving or being, there's all these labels that we have for a horse that is very obviously struggling to handle what's being asked of them during a trim, that is challenging their body in different ways. Can you share a little bit about that before we get down the postural, and maybe they blend here?
I think that they definitely blend, and I am by no means a bodywork expert here. But what I am finding is that there seem to be some patterns. And again, since I'm not an expert, I don't have all those patterns totally worked out. But through dialogue with the riders and the owners, I'm starting to see the pieces, learning more from the professionals that I work with, from people like Celeste or Dr. Rachel Hart. I'm just learning more and more. And so a lot of times I see horses that have incredible shoulder tension that can't abduct to hold the leg out and away from their body for me to be able to get under them comfortably. And again, I'm a little bit smaller, so I can actually get under them pretty well and help them with that. But I do think that those horses experience nerve pain in that brachial plexus that runs down their legs I've had horses that it's not always the other foot that hurts to stand on. I think that it is the way that they have to shift their weight and the way that their body twists a little bit and the way that the scapula lays over the rib cage that can be really uncomfortable when you think about a farrier position and the fact that that whole limb has to rotate a little bit. And I think that can be not a very pleasant experience for many horses. I also see horses that have hind end issues, struggle staying stable in that thoracic sling to hold up the front leg. The hind legs bother them, but I think because it's a soft tissue attachment for front legs, it's just way harder. And if they're lacking that thoracic sling development and core stability, it's really hard for them to want to stay vertical.
Yeah, when you see it like horses, dropping or, just create that there's behaviors that come, which, now, thank goodness, more and more research and understanding around, this is actually telling me that my horse is stressed or struggling with something. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense with, I'm in the nerve course right now, the nerve release course with Celeste, and just that sense that, even looking at my one mare, when I ask for both the internal rotation at the elbow and also the abduction away from the body, it's a thing to do those movements for most of the horses that I've, like my girls, essentially, it's like, oh yeah, that is tight. It's restricted and limited. And that's a big ask, especially like you say, you're small, getting under there. To have someone who's asking even more mobility in that space must be quite uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think that definitely poses a lot of challenges for the horses physically, but then it creates a point of emotional stress for them and anticipation of discomfort as well. And then that's where we start to see the behaviors creep up, and then the farriers. And I don't blame them. It's not the right answer, but I don't blame them. They get frustrated. And they get defensive because like they themselves hurt too, and so it just becomes this unfortunate vicious cycle. And I think that if we could all just pause and like breathe a little bit and realize the horses aren't trying to be bad, that they're just communicating that they don't feel stable or something feels uncomfortable or they're afraid it's going to hurt. And if we can make changes to our approach, they usually stand a lot better for us.
Yeah, I've seen that. I trim my girls myself, and I use my hoof stand, like the sling for the fronts, and they're that like so much more comfortable just resting a foot in the alignment of the front leg. And I've really noticed a change, especially with my one mare who just could not balance on her front legs, especially since doing the balanced movement method as well, helping her thoracic sling. And what she does is she actually I'll ask her for the leg and just wait. And she'll actually figure out her back legs and be like, okay, I got it. And then she'll give me her front leg. Like, she's like, okay, we're there. It's really cool to see.
That's so wonderful that you give her a chance to do that. Think of how many people are like, no, pick it up now. And they never get the chance to sort out their hind end and move their feet where they need them. And then it could just be easy and they could just pick it up for you. Instead, it becomes this struggle because we said, pick it up now, no matter what. And then it ends up being a battle sometimes. So I think it's awesome that you're giving her that space and listening to her needing to move a little bit so she can be comfortable and pick up her foot.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see how much longer she's comfortable holding the foot up as well.
Sure.
And just this sense of it's just a relaxing time, like a connecting time, which I would hope that, we could get to it's kind of like my vision is it's like getting a pedicure, it's just kind of chill.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's maybe even relaxing, right? Yeah.
I would love for it to be like that for the vast majority of horses.
It would be really nice. Not a fight. Oh, right? Man. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think these are such important conversations to have, and they don't always get talked about, right? It's that sense of these are the sorts of things that, we just kind of forget to say stuff about because it's so commonplace, Mm-hmm.
Yep. I recently went out to do an in-person consultation for a wonderful lady who is incredible with her horsemanship. Her horses are stunning, and stunning in terms of like, gosh, their emotional intelligence, their ability to have a conversation with you. And the feedback, it was wonderful. And then she went to pick a foot and it was like, give me a foot. And I was like, oh, hold on a second. We can do this different. She's like, what do you mean? And I showed her, and it's funny, like all of us, we all have something going on in our bodies. You know, our necks hurt, our backs hurt, or we don't have great hand strength, whatever. And I was like, save your body. Like, you hurt. Okay, cool. So do I. Also, if you just pause and you just ask your horse to lift its leg, I bet you it's going to go a whole lot easier than you just trying to pick it up.
Yeah.
And then it was cool because a couple of the ones that we worked with ended up having like this, oh, thank you. Oh, okay. Yes, I can stand here and I can actually offer you my leg. And it was such a more relaxing experience for humans and horses all around. It was profound. It sounds woo-woo-y, but it's totally not. And it doesn't take a ton of extra time. It just takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of feel and supporting them to be able to say, I need a moment. Let me figure this out.
Yeah. Yeah. I found that doing feet, and maybe you can, I'm sure you can relate. It's like a Zen meditation. A lot of the times it's like, okay, like just breathing, patience, you know, like let them put their foot down and we'll just go back to it. Like it becomes this practice, right?
Yep. Absolutely. On the other end of the spectrum, I see it, horses get trained differently on how to pick up feet. And I have seen, I feel like, every aspect of that spectrum. And I have a horse that I work with now that he is obedient to a fault. Like, he is so wonderful. He's like, here, I'll do it. And he does it with so much tension and anxiety, but he won't do it wrong. He's like, here, I'll do it. But there's so much tension, and he's like crammed forward on the cross ties, and he's crammed into the corner, but he's holding his leg up for you and he's going to do it. And I'm like, oh, buddy, like we don't, it doesn't need to be like this. Yeah. And at first he was like, you could see the look on his face, like the little bit of anxiety. What do you mean it doesn't have to be like this? I know how to do this with tension. Because he's so kind and he's so wonderful, probably just manhandled him through it. Picked up his legs forcefully, made him stand there and do it. Shove him up against a wall and just do it. Because at the end of the day, most farriers, not all of them, just want to get in there and get the job done and get to the next one. And he did. He let him do that. And so he'd stand there and I was like, well, we're not going to do it like that. And so you'd have to get to that like Zen space with him and just breathe and help him think about relaxing. And eventually I could keep him in the center of the cross ties with his head and neck relaxed in pillar one. He's like, okay, I can do this. And I'd start to turn to think about picking up, like walking to pick up his hind foot, and he'd swing over again and he'd panic. I was like, okay. All I did was turn and think about that. All right, we're going to slow that down. And then we worked on it quite a few times. But this is the first horse I've ever told the owner, don't pick up his feet when he's in this place. Just don't. He needs to learn to do it different. And it's okay. It's okay for him to feel unsure. And now I'll just show him a new way, and that he can do this in this relaxed space. And he's like the biggest horse crush I think I've ever had. He's just this wonderful soul. Oh my gosh.
I'm glad you have horse crushes too. When I did body work, I was like, can I just gonna sneak this one in my back pocket and take him home? Like,
I'm not one of those people that like crushes on everyone's horses. There have only been a very small handful of horses in the last 20 years of my career that I've been like, oh, I love this one. I really love this one. And he's just quickly become one of them. He's just such a good boy, and he's trying so hard, and he just is starting to feel that, oh, I could relax. This actually could be so different. And it's so fun to watch him just blossom and be supported in his environment. And then with me, like it brings his owner to tears. It brings me to tears, and he's just breathing in pillar one. And we're like, oh, this is how this should be.
I love that. Like, what a teacher too, right? It's like, like all the other horses that he's helped by showing you that a different way of being, also his owner as well. So very,
sure.
very cool. Oh, well, let's come back around to the chat about the connection of hooves to posture. Because I know
Yeah.
this is a big one now in my world anyways. I think in a lot of, yeah, with a lot of people, body workers, different people wanting to understand this more fully. So can you share a little bit about what you've learned about this connection?
I think for me, it really did start with the hind end, which is pretty backwards for most farriers. I was taught pretty quickly that the hind end is massively overlooked, and that with that means that we have a lot of pathology back there that's not being addressed, and we've accepted long toes, low heels as
Mhm.
common, and it being that common that it's normal, and it's not normal despite the fact that it's so commonly seen. I mean, you open any magazine, any ad, and look at the feet. There are very few that have positive hoof morphology.
Yeah.
And so I have been playing with this hind end thing for quite some time. And I would say that negative palmar angles behind, plantar angles behind, palmar angles are on the front feet, plantar angles are on the hind
Thanks
feet.
for that clarification. So plantar is on the
Hind feet.
hind and palmar is on the front. Okay, cool.
All referencing the same thing. It's the relationship of the bottom of the coffin bone to the ground. It just anatomically, we talk about it a little bit differently. And so negative plantar angles and broken back hoof pastern axis are pretty common in a vast majority of horses, especially on the hind end. And with that, we see hock pain, stifle pain, tight hamstrings, low back pain, SI issues. I mean, the list goes on from there. And so I've had a really positive correlation between aligning the hind feet and getting them into a better place, and a lot of those areas of discomfort resolving for those horses. I have one client who's actually tracked the number of joint injections that she does, and has reduced them by a third since we started working together, which is significant. And these are, consistently performing animals. These are horses that are showing, 2-3 times a month. Yep. And on the road going. So to have any reduction in joint maintenance is huge. So that's really exciting. No scientific studies there or anything, just somebody willing to look at the data that they have, in relationship to when I started working with them. That's pretty cool.
Amazing. Yeah. And I see this a lot as well, where, as a body worker, when I come out, it's always like this little delicate conversation of like, so who does your feet? Like,
yeah.
And I remember even in bodywork school, we had to do an assignment on how to talk to your farriers so they don't get defensive, or like the owner so they can talk to their farrier. So you know what I mean? It was just this real like tippy toe, like don't upset anybody, and I often think that when I'm working on horses, because you see it, in the body. It's like you see what's happening up in the body, and it becomes more and more like, okay, I can band-aid up here, but there's things happening in the feet, right?
Yeah. And this is where it's really important to me, and something that's become kind of my mission is to help horse owners be able to have conversations, because we've just helped improve basic education, right? Yeah. We've just helped them understand the hoof that they have, that's on the horse that they have, make it easy for them to understand, give them some terminology and understanding, so that when they talk to their farriers, they know a little bit more. And so that when the farriers say things, they can understand things better. And then you can make an assessment. Do you like the way that the farrier answered that? Is that something that you're having a hard time understanding? Can you ask for clarification? And then how do we suggest change without, stepping on toes, which is really challenging. And that is a very difficult thing to help clients and customers navigate those conversations. And it is a little bit case by case, but usually I'm able to help them start to have those conversations about how do we create change for the horse that puts the farrier kind of in the driving seat without making them feel like, well, the body worker said I had to do this. It definitely can be delicate. And I usually try to use the word I as much as possible instead of you, so you as in yourself, taking ownership of changes and asking for things, kind of takes some of the responsibility off of them and doesn't put them in such a defensive space.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, it's almost learning, like we have to learn a new skill set of having, I guess, hard conversations, right? That advocate for our horses, along the line, right? Mm-hmm.
And I find it can be something as simple as a conversation could go like this. Hey, I saw this research that talks about how low heels on the front feet increases strain on the navicular bone. And I'm concerned about that. And then I was looking at the feet and I noticed this. Can you tell me more about what you're seeing with my horse's feet and how you're trimming them? And give them a chance to respond and see what you think about that. And again, it's just information gathering. What your farrier tells you what, and I don't want to say that. I feel like some people explain things really well and some people don't, but that doesn't always equal that they're not good at their job, right? Some people just don't articulate what they're doing, but they're good at what they're doing. So asking the questions like that can be helpful to at least spark that conversation and give you information and feedback as to whether or not you feel like the problem's actually being addressed or not, and whether or not it's being done in a way that makes sense to you or not. And then maybe saying, hey, what if we tried these fancy new fandangled pads that everybody's raving about? I don't know if you like them or not, but like, could we try them? What do you think of that? And still asking, like, what do you think about that? Could we try them? Because no farrier wants to feel like they were asked to do something and then the horse fell apart. I think if there can be an understanding of, what the consequences are, positive or negative, for a choice that's made in hoof care from all sides. If the owner understands, hey, this may or may not work. If the farrier understands, hey, this may or may not work. I think that if we're all on the same page, hopefully, we can start to make some changes and improve things for the horses.
Yeah, I love that. There's two directions I want to take the conversation, so I'm going to decide. But we talked about both of them here. So one, of course, is barefoot versus shod. And I feel like I want to take the verses out of there and just talk about, okay, like this sense of what I'm hearing more and more, because I've been barefoot with both my girls. They've been barefoot for, Diva, we just have celebrated our 20th anniversary together. And so for like 19 of those years, she's been barefoot, and about 12 of them, I've been trimming her myself. And then with my other mare, she's been barefoot since I've known her. But she's one I'm more curious about because she's dealing with early onset arthritis of the coffin joint and navicular. So there's just this other interesting piece. Her hooves are not easy to trim, I suppose you could say. And she has had, I believe, a lot of nerve compression from a young age. So she's had changes, particularly in her left front. So yeah, I'm very curious to hear kind of your sense, because it sounds like you did this big full circle. You went from farrier school, putting on metal shoes, and then all through the barefoot, and then around the composite, and then sort of this sense of potentially arriving back at a place of what sounds like maybe a much more well-informed, balanced sense of what can help each individual horse. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, wow. So we do what works. Period. What works for that animal in that environment, with that diet, with that job, it's what works, right? And then it comes down to other things. Where are we at with hoof morphology? Do we have a healthy back of the foot or not? I have a really high success rate of taking horses out of shoes to barefoot and them staying sound and continuing to work. But when I first in my career had left shoeing and went to barefoot, there was a thought of barefoot is best always. Mm-hmm. And even if the horse is sore, it'll eventually come around. And I believe that. I didn't have a reason not to believe that, except for my mare, whose name also happens to be Diva, that I've had for 20 years. She could never go barefoot. I have tried everything under the sun with her, and she is not a horse that can. Now I know more, and I believe I understand why she can't, but it's nothing that I can do in the feet. It's in the body. So for me, comfort is probably the most paramount thing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I tend to say that it cannot be our only metric. So I see very often in the performance world that horses are sound and doing their job on really crappy feet, on really bad hoof morphology. And that's what I'm talking about when I say soundness cannot be our only metric, because those horses are a breath away from breaking half the time, probably more than that, actually. So yes, I think comfort is paramount. I don't believe in making a horse intentionally suffer through a transition period just because I think barefoot is better is helpful. That kind of chronic pain is not helpful for healing on anything. So if we can take shoes off and keep them comfortable through boots, through maybe casting as a transition tool, or maybe going to composites for a few cycles as a transition tool, absolutely, let's do it. The reality is that most of my clients are in boarding situations. And so managing boots can be really tricky, or the diet can't be exactly dialed in, or the turnout situation isn't quite ideal for doing what we need to do. And so that's where I say, okay, well, can we improve hoof morphology? Can we help the foot be happier and healthier truly with shoeing? And shoeing usually means for me with pads and packing and frog support pads, not just any pad. Though that anything is better than nothing. I like the frog support pads. It is the closest thing to barefoot if we're going to be shoeing them. And then I can rehab the feet in the shoes. And then I can make the transition out of shoes way more successful and way more comfortable. So to me, it isn't barefoot versus shod. They both have their place, but we have to think about all the factors involved. And yes, it would be super if we all could have horses on a track system and feed them ideally, and they could be out with friends forever and ever. And I work in the performance world, and that is the reality for those horses, is that they're not going to have that kind of lifestyle. And so how do we make that work? And I am very fortunate to have clients that, despite being in the performance world, actually do want to see if we can get the horses barefoot. And we do. I have an adult amateur hunter that does the big circuits around the country, and that horse is barefoot. It's pretty well advertised. It's pretty darn cool. So is it possible? Yes. Is it for every horse? No, it's not. But that one has everything working for it, you know?
Yeah. And I hear that because, you know, I've been that body worker that's like, you should see about having this horse barefoot. And, you know, the horse just can't, you know, they just can't do it. It just doesn't work for them. And I think for me as a body worker, I miss, you know, some of the information that was needed. You know, obviously the farrier agreed and let's try it out. But like, okay, yeah, that frog needs more support. There's structures in that foot that aren't working well in shoes that need support, that this horse isn't in a lot of pain when they have these shoes off, right? So then this horse lasts a cycle, the person goes, oh my gosh, they're so sore, and the shoes go back on, and that's kind of, you know, that's kind of that. So it's really helpful to hear this. Okay, there is actually baby steps, because that's something I've been learning so much about the last few years. It's like, what kind of baby steps can you add in to actually ease a transition more and more and more and more? So it's not this sudden thing. It's not going, hey, body, figure this out. You know, there's stepping stones to working. If, say, the barefoot transition is what someone's wanting, there's phases to that, which I think, you know, a lot of us don't necessarily realize or don't know the phases, or it's, you know, it's just not common knowledge to understand that. So I really am appreciating this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that I've had plenty of horses come in that the people will tell me, well, we tried him barefoot and it didn't work, so we can't take his shoes off. What I don't know is the parameters with which they tried to do it. What state was that foot in? Was it healthy? Was it able to even make that transition? probably not. And so usually I can educate them, make the changes in the feet and help them out. And then those horses actually can go barefoot because that's actually what the horses or the owners really do want, is the horses to be barefoot. So often we see, we've kind of called it now a caudal failure, which is where we'll end up seeing on a shod horse with no pad, that the frog displaces downward between the shoe, the heels of the shoe. And when you take a shoe off of a foot like that, there's so much frog pressure, and the frog really hates constant pressure. It doesn't do well in those kinds of situations. And some of those horses become incredibly sore. And so that's where the transition tools really can help us realign those structures, get them into better relationship with each other, the frog, the heels, the digital cushion, the lateral cartilages, and really get the foot functioning better. Then when we go to pull the shoes, the foot's in a way better place to be able to assimilate those changes.
Oh, it makes so much sense. I'm just like, oh gosh, okay, yeah. Because
and then I tend to be the person that everybody hates me because they're like, well, let's pull shoes in winter. I'm like, that's the worst time for here, because if we don't get a lot of snow and the ground is frozen, that's miserable for them, so we're needing to pull shoes in October, but everyone's like, but it's still riding weather. I'm like, I know, but it's the right weather to pull shoes, so I try to be really careful about that as well.
Oh yeah, completely. Because if they're trotting on hard frozen ground, then their frogs are unhappy. Yeah, not fun.
Totally. It's a miserable experience. And for some people, they pull the shoes, they chuck the horses out in the pasture, and they see them again in a few months, And so I think it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind for them. That doesn't mean the horse didn't struggle with his feet.
Yeah. And as we know, that when they're struggling with their feet that way, it's impacting, other things up the line, right? Like, yeah, because they're, not comfortable bearing, it's going to shift things. That's so interesting. So with something like navicular, because this is such a, oh my gosh, you hear it all the time. Oh, my horse has navicular. And my sense is that, there's, I guess, different, like with my mare, it's arthritis, been there since she was 4. And yes, it's impacting her navicular. I think there's a bit of a different sense of how it's impacting that area. But what is your kind of, when you unpack this particular condition, I guess you could say, can you tell us a little bit more about your perspective on it?
I will start by saying I am not the authority on navicular.
Yeah.
And I feel like my education around that is still growing.
Yeah.
So the way that I think about navicular is that if we are seeing radiographic change, we've already had soft tissue involvement for way longer than we expected. Radiographic change also does not equal a lame horse.
No.
So you can have horses with clean radiographs that are lame, which is why I think there's soft tissue involvement that we can't image. We can't see that with a radiograph. You have to pay for an MRI or a CT scan or something else, which is sometimes not, able to be done. Resources are finite for some people. So I think about hoof morphology and I think about alignment. And I think a lot of these horses have distorted feet, and those feet can look a lot of different ways. So I would say there's always in the back of my mind, the goal of trying to hit my ideals in terms of having ideal phalangeal alignment, positive palmar angle, whatever that degree needs to be, having the breakover in an appropriate place, appropriate being that it's not so far extended ahead of, the tip of the coffin bone, that we have a good, healthy heel on the horse, that the frogs are healthy and happy, the digital cushion is as good as we can help it be. And we try to shoot for all these ideals. And sometimes that's just still not enough, right? Sometimes these horses are just still uncomfortable. And that's where we have to chuck everything that science tells us out the window. I said that. And listen to what the horse is telling us. And sometimes that may mean we need to lower the heel more. Sometimes that may mean we need to raise the heel more. That it is not a one size fits all. It's what works for that horse. And yeah, ugly might be a thing. And that's okay. You know, I was just recently talking with Alicia Harlov, who like navicular is her thing. And she loves working with navicular horses. And she's like, we have to embrace the ugly, because for some horses, the ugly foot is the thing that keeps those horses sound. And we have to be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's finding that like sweet spot for them. Hey.
Yep, absolutely. And it can be a really fine line. And some horses need to be trimmed every 2 weeks, you know, and they really need to keep that dialed in and tight, you know, and also there's no shame in a horse needing to have shoes to keep them comfortable. You know, there's definitely concern about, well, we couldn't get them comfortable barefoot, and they feel really bad about that. And that the only way that the horse can be comfortable is in shoes. It's okay. It's okay. You know, do the things you can do, the best that you can do, maybe add pads in packing. Some horses that may not be tolerated well, but that's okay. If it helps your horse be comfortable, we will take quality of life over idealism.
I love that. It's so refreshing to hear as well. And just like, yeah, giving every person permission to, okay. And, you know, I always sort of hand it back to that horse's steward and say, okay, you know your horse, right? It's like, let's work together to figure out what's going to be absolutely best for this unique being in front of us. And then we go from there, right?
And to remember that they're not static. I think that so many people look at feet and they just think that the feet are the feet and they don't change, but they really do. And we can go through phases, and maybe you can go barefoot for a while and then you need shoes, or maybe you need shoes for a while and then you can go barefoot, and that like all of the above are okay. And that it's also okay if you don't have the wherewithal to mess with boots every single day. They do require a different level of care and commitment. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the people that want to do that. And for the other people that are struggling to be able to do that for their horses because they believe that barefoot's better, but they're also dying trying to get the boots taken care of and dried and cleaned. And it's okay. It's okay to put shoes on. It does not have to be a struggle. If it makes your life easier and works for the horse, please, like, let's make this less stressful. Let's let you have time to enjoy your horse.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I have this really weird kind of woo-woo question for you, and maybe you have no idea. But one thing that I've always wondered about, or often wondered about, is because I work a lot with like energy work and that sort of thing. I've often wondered about metal shoes and like around grounding. Like, you know, if a horse has 4 shoes, there's sometimes this sense that I get where they just can't get on the ground. Have you ever found that?
I have.
Yeah.
I have. And then on the other side of that, so I think some of it, yes, energy, but also like the proprioception of the functions, the steel shoe, the rigidity of the shoe itself, not necessarily the material. I'll get to that in a second. But I think that the rigidity of the shoe itself changes the proprioception and the way the horse feels the ground. So I've definitely had horses improve in performance taking the shoes off, where they can really feel their foot and really adjust to the terrain better. But then I had actually worked with an energy worker, and we were talking about I've worked with several over the years, but one in particular had said that she will not use rubber or composite ever on the bottom of her horse's feet. And I was like, that's a pretty bold statement for somebody who really likes natural everything.
Yeah.
And I asked her why, and she said, because it doesn't conduct energy.
Right. With the plastic.
Right. It's not a conductor. Metal is a conductor, and we're all energetically connected to the earth, to the heavens through our bodies. And that the metal, if we're gonna put shoes on, that metal is a better option because it allows that conductivity to continue. And I was like, that's an interesting thought process. I mean, I believe that it will go beyond the rubber shoe or the composite shoe, but I thought it was really interesting that she said it that way.
Yeah, for sure. It's been one of those like little curiosities in the back of my mind for like a long while, because I know that there's this sense of as well, the talk of, okay, well, is the hoof able to expand within, a metal shoe specifically as much as it would in a composite shoe, or of course barefoot? And I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but I've often wondered that as well. So that's something that you hear as far as like when we're talking about the shod versus unshod, like whether there's enough breathability for the hoof itself.
Yeah. The foot will continue to expand and return to its normal state, expand, contract. Even with steel shoes on, if you take a pair of shoes off, you usually see a groove worn in the heel of the shoe. So the foot is still moving, but the way that it dissipates load and vibration is invariably altered when you put a steel rim shoe or aluminum rim shoe on the foot. When you take that frog out of engagement, it absolutely changes the way that foot interacts with the ground. And now there's thoughts, and this is the argument that's made, is that, well, the horses are on deformable surfaces, so all that footing packs up into the foot and supports it, so it's not a big deal. And I'm like, well, if that were the case, then we wouldn't be seeing caudal failure, and we wouldn't be seeing these prolapsed frogs, and we wouldn't be seeing the problems. So it doesn't hold, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
I have yet to work.
Yeah, that's what I wondered about. Yeah. Okay, that's so helpful. The last little question I had, well, I have a few more, of course, but I also wondered about, so one was high-low, and the other one was around like hoof first landing. So maybe if we can talk a little bit, because of course, a lot of stuff coming out now talking about high-low and what that means and what's happening in the horse. And I would love to just unpack that. We've got about 10 minutes left. I
think I will summarize high-low with it depends.
Yeah, totally.
I think that high-low is, oh gosh, we're still learning about it, right? We've talked about babies and grazing patterns and how they develop. We've talked about birth trauma that happens, and how much that could be playing a role in high-low, compensatory patterns, genetic contributions to high-low, that it doesn't originate in the foot, that it's originating in the body. But then I think that the feet become impacted, right? Because the way that the feet are getting loaded from the body above it change it. And then I think it can become a vicious cycle. But then I think there are always factors that we can't control to alleviate it, to make them more of a matched pair instead of so mismatched. I think that the only way that we can actually really try to address it is through the whole horse. We have to look at the rest of the body. It's chiro, it's teeth. Oh my gosh, it's so much teeth. Chiro, teeth, Celeste's work, body work, the saddle fit. I mean, it's all of it. And then we have to be working in concert, because if I'm balancing feet to a crooked body, because I don't have a choice, right? Like I have the body that I have in front of me and I'm balancing the feet to that horse that day. If I'm just holding it in those compensation patterns, then, we won't get out of that. And so it is really helpful for the rest of the pieces to be addressed. And then I can start to be able to see changes in the feet and the way that they're growing. And I can start to make changes in the trim to help them even further. And I'm not saying that I'm ever trying to make them match. I'm just trying to make each foot be ideal for that limb. And sometimes one limb has a slightly lower angle than the other. So trying to just get it to be as close to neutral and ideal for each limb is usually my goal.
I love that.
A lot of times I think that they do come around. When we can have a global approach, I see feet become more of a pair than I ever thought possible.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, especially with things that maybe started at, like you say, at birth. That's a big deal that you've seen that shift. Very encouraging. Yeah. Awesome. Absolutely. And then my other question was about like a heel first landing. So I've heard this so much, and especially trimming my own horses, I'm always like, is that heel first? Like I'm always watching. I'm terrible at knowing. I need to do like slow-mo videos or something. But just wondering about the physiology of that and like what it means, when you're seeing that or not seeing that in your horses.
I think heel first landings are good. And then I would also say that we also see heel first landings in pathological feet too. So I don't think that they are the end all be all. But what I absolutely don't want to see is a toe first landing. That is pathological. That is a problem. That is indicating that we have bigger things we need to be looking at, whether it's hoof related or something else. So toe first landings are always a problem unless the horse is going up a very steep hill. Then that would be a normal time that they would be landing toe first. Otherwise, they shouldn't be landing toe first. Heel first, flat, or slightly lateral tend to be widely considered to be normal. Yeah. Is it ideal? Is it the best? I think research is still looking at it, because then there's thoughts about, okay, so they may land that way, but they're not loading that way necessarily. And we have to consider where the load is occurring. And that, I think, is going to take a little bit more time in research to be able to say, is landing laterally okay or not okay? Do we want the ground reaction force to always be in XYZ spot? You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of variability there with not a lot of information yet. We're getting there. Science is happening. Research is always happening. But I feel like half the time it just brings up more and more questions.
Absolutely. It's a rabbit hole. That's for sure. Oh, amazing. So on that note, I would love to hear, I think you shared a few earlier, but you had shared about, accounts that you follow, people on social media that you kind of keep an eye on as far as like condensing some of the research and sort of bringing it in a bit more of a maybe a digestible fashion to the masses. Who are your faves that you're?
Oh, I really appreciate Yogi Sharp. He is my documentalist. For those that don't know, the man behind the equine documentalist name, Yogi is wonderful at breaking it down. Initially, I felt like intimidated, like, wow, that's really long post. I don't know if I can handle all that, but I really appreciate what he does. I don't think that he could summarize things any better or any more simply without losing what he's going for. So I really appreciate what he's doing. I would say that Ula, and I don't know how to say her last name, and I don't want to do her a disservice, but she is the hoof architect.
Okay.
She's a little bit newer on social media in terms of sharing her work, but oh my gosh, it's brilliant. She's been able to like really take things that I've seen and like define it better and put words to it, and then like really help me unravel it. And I love her work. I like that's a rabbit hole. That's not beginner rabbit hole, but that's a bigger, deeper rabbit hole. But if you're super sciencey and into it, absolutely. But it is a lot to digest, but I love it. I really love it. I think those two are my big favorites,
awesome.
But there are other people doing really good work out there and talking about really great things. I would just say that those two are probably, I think, at the forefront of my mind, who I've just been paying attention to the most recently.
Fantastic. That's so great. I'll have more of a look down those particular rabbit holes. And because this is an area that fascinates me as well. So that is great. Thank you so much. And as we close up today, how do people get in touch with you, find your work, Kendra?
Oh, it's evolving. I've just been kind of keeping my head down over here in southern Wisconsin. So I don't have a website or anything fancy. I've got my Facebook personal page, which I usually have personal stuff on. But then I've got my business page, Skorstad Farrier Service. And I usually share a lot of the things that I find interesting that are hoof related, but then body related and training related, because it all goes together. So I tend to share a lot of things over there and post case studies as I find them. I'm working on building an online course, but I'm not there yet. So it's coming.
Awesome. Keep us posted for sure on that.
Okay.
That's great. Well, thank you again for your generosity today and all of your sharing. This has been very enlightening and helpful for myself, and I'm sure for my listeners as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're definitely welcome. I appreciate you being here. And Thanks to everybody for tuning in today. I hope you learned a thing or two like me, and we'll see you next time for another episode. Bye for now.
Thanks so much for listening in today. If you're interested in learning more about equine cranial therapy from Elise and I, we now have an introductory webinar available, and you can sign up for that at bit.ly /CST webinar. So that's bit.ly /CST webinar to get that really cool replay and be signed up for our live Q&A. In that, you get 2 amazing techniques as well to start your journey in cranial therapy. And if you are interested in learning more about our certification, you can head to equilibriatherapeutics.com /equine-craniosacral. So we hope to see you there. You can apply today. Our intake begins January the 1st, but you can apply anytime, and this intake closes January 31st. Okay, have a great day.